Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, all. It's Bear here. And I'd like to welcome you to my YouTube channel, aboxwithnolid, a channel I'm creating not only to just, bring the awareness around the realities trauma creates and complex trauma, but I really want to get into the mechanics and bring the knowledge base up and all the variabilities around it so that we can start to create an ecology that supports our healing. And we can start to bring in all these new things without the issues that they would normally create so that we can improve the quality of our lives. Now, in this video, it is around the attachment base, but this one has a very important understanding attached to it, a critical understanding attached to it. And a lot of it comes around the relationship between a therapist and their client or their patient, however you want to view it, or a person that you go to for help and how they choose to see you and how they choose to help you. And again, it's one of these natural assimilation pathways of how our body will work with that information. But it is something that I see so often in so many different contexts that is not understood. And when what the therapist is actually doing, or the person giving this advice, the healer or therapist, however you want to view them, it is going into feeding a component that we've created rather than the person. What I'm speaking about is the avatar, the defensive or protective avatar that we create. This persona, this aspect of who we are that we create to show the world. Now, a way to really understand this is when you look at the world of adoption. All adoption attachment for the adoptee perspective is a survival state. Our biological connections to our biological parents has been severed because we've been taken, and we need to adapt and become part of a non-biological family. We need to learn their mannerisms and their way of doing things and that environment, how to be part of. That process turns it from a natural inherited connection into I have to learn. When we have to learn as an infant, it is a threat. This is the reality of that attachment. That is where it is the strongest when you're looking at adoption and foster care scenarios. But we all see it. Our entire world, particularly the Western world, runs on these personas. We create an avatar that we show the world. You've only got to look at the cosmetic surgery. You've only got to look at all these things that people do. You only got to look at the chest pain that the young guys do. That's a persona. I'm tough, I'm mean, you won't mess with me, otherwise you do blah, blah. That is a persona. And it's harmless enough if it's recognized as a persona, but more often than not, it becomes a person's constructed identity. That constructed identity, when that becomes embedded and every other facet gets repressed, that is when it becomes a problem. Now, when we go through trauma and traumatics, especially complex trauma, which is multiple type, multiple events, the fundamental differentiation. Trauma is one traumatic experience, one car accident, one tornado, so forth and so forth. One major event. Complex trauma is where it's multiple type, multiple events. You're not just dealing with one set of traumatic responses, you're dealing with many. That's what I mean, and that's the fundamental difference between complex trauma and trauma. When you're dealing with traumatic experiences and complex traumatic experiences, the persona is so embedded so quickly into our survival state. It becomes the face of our survival mechanisms. When we go into a therapeutic process, we need to be able to answer the question, is what we're assimilating to heal reinforcing our survival avatar, our defensive avatar, this survival persona? Or is it actually coming into the person that needs to heal? It's like riding on the shield. The shield is facing outward. It's not going internal. It's not facing to the person holding it. It is there to feed the responses and to protect the person holding it. And any information or any technique or whatever we do that feeds that persona, yeah, we're reinforcing the shield, but we're also reinforcing the need to have it. And therein lies the problem. It's very difficult to recognize how to get around a survival state shield when you work with someone. What I find when you bring a narrative into the mix, when you bring stories into the mix and you engage in a more natural format, you start to bring this movement around and you can recognize the little edges of this shield and start to recognize pathways for that person to naturally accept what you're telling them and how you're working with them and what you're trying to do to help them. In most mental health, particularly public health sector mental health, they don't do that. They don't have the resources at the time, regardless of the justifications around it. It doesn't work to help the person. And this is why I'm creating this channel, is I'm trying to help you guys learn how to help yourselves and to work with what you have access to bring it in to help yourself. But it is understanding, is it feeding your shield, your defensive persona, or is it actually going into the person behind that shield? Again, when we start to look at understanding attachment, the first person we need to attach to is ourselves. We need to recognize how we view ourselves. Because more often than not, that shield is turned against us as well. So by taking the time to understand your defensive processes, being honest, this takes a courageous step. It's being honest with, I know I'm doing this to protect me. I know I'm vulnerable and scared. And you don't have to admit it to anybody else. But sometimes sitting with a mirror in front of you and talking to yourself with a notepad and a pen handy or pencil. Pens sometimes don't work. Pencils are always good. Pencils always work. Even if they break, get a sharpener. Pencils always work. But by talking to yourself in a mirror, and it's stripping away the lies that we say to ourselves to get to that honesty of, yes, I know I do this. I know the reasons why I do this. And I'm okay with that. When we recognize our own shield and what we use to protect ourselves, and we're honest enough with ourselves of this shield and how we use it to protect ourselves, we can start to, yes, you tell me this stuff, it goes into my shield, but I'm aware of it. I go into my own space, I take that information, I sit with it, I bring it into a more natural setting, and then I can work with it. That is one of the biggest key steps to healing. I've said it for years, in talks and that I've done, is where if we can get to that point where we can recognize what we do to harm ourselves, then we are ready to start to change it. We need to get to that point first before we try to start to change things. Because we got to learn how to not feed the reason to have the shield. The shield is a tool. It is a tool that we need to have. But we also need to know when to put the shield up and when to take it down. When we're living in a trauma state, in a survival state, it's always up. And it's a sphere. It's not just this one thing that we got on our arm. It's a sphere that surrounds us. We need to be able to move it into a tool, into a resource that we use. And to do that, we need to recognize it. We also need to recognize how we've created it. And where it began was a persona that we got, if I'm this, then I can be safe. And we learned that from what was going on around us. We picked something or someone in our environment, or a group of different people in our environment, took bits and pieces of it to create a persona that we thought would make us accepted and safe and part of. All children do it. All young children do it. That is part of the whole wearing a superhero costume, a princess costume, blah, blah. All these things are building that persona. As parents, you need to be aware of that and make sure they understand that it's building a tool, not a person. But it's getting to that understanding. So before I go off track again, I'll end it here. But I really want you guys to value taking that time. As I said, it's a very confronting technique, sitting in front of a mirror and looking at yourself and talking to yourself. But it is something that is very worthwhile when you have the courage to do it. Do it for 2 or 3 minutes at a time. Don't sit there for hours. Do it a few minutes at a time and build up that process of learning how you defend yourself, how you use this wall to protect yourself. Because in recognizing it, you can know how to bring it down when you're ready to. When you're ready to bring information in, to assimilate it to help you heal. As always, I love your guys' comments and feedback. Please be mindful, please be safe, and I'll see you all next time.